Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and in this episode we are revisiting the bonnet bulge on the Alfarrari. Alright guys, as you know on this channel, I am not afraid of, if it's worth doing twice. And this bonnet bulge is no exception. Those paying attention will have seen a while ago that I started building this bonnet bulge to fit the Ferrari engine into my Alfa 105. And the underneath structure and everything I really like, but the bulge is it's just bigger than I wanted. I am not actually that unhappy with the design of the bulge. There were lots of comments about it should be shaped differently or whatever, and there are all sorts of reasons why a lot of those designs wouldn't work or just wouldn't be right. I don't want it blended in. I want it to look like an addition to the car because ultimately it is going to be unsightly to an extent. That is just what it's going to take to fit the Ferrari engine in here. But I want to talk a bit more about it now and go into some details about how I can potentially make this better than what it currently is. So my big issue with this bonnet bulge is the fact that it's just so high at this peak here that and that is mostly because of what is happening underneath. This is far too sharp and far too pronounced and really makes it quite a big, flat, almost sort of area on the front here that I'm not a fan of. Let me show you why I had to build it like that. So with the bonnet off, you can see that we've got the factory plenums, which I'm going to keep, and it comes into the throttle bodies, and then I need to be able to get the air in around. So it extends these throttle bodies so far forward at such a height that I had to make this bulge quite big and steep to cover all this in. And when I first looked at the line of the Ferrari engine in the car, when I cut the manifold down, I thought it actually fit quite well, and it actually does. But by the time you add clearance for the bulge and everything else to it, it starts getting just excessively high, and I have been racking my brain for quite a while about how to rectify it. All right, so I've removed the throttle bodies, etc. again, and before we get into it, I have covered this many times, but I'm going to cover it again because I know there's going to be a ton of comments saying the same thing that's been said a million times before. Could I change this plenum? Could I move it and sort of cut it and mount these plenums either side like this? And no, I can't, because inside this, basically, the air comes in from this side and goes down into this side and vice versa. It actually crosses over, and then at higher revs, it actually opens up a second set of butterflies, and then the air goes straight down. So this is all part of the same thing. The inlet tract is long, which is why you can't separate them out. Could I use there's a Maserati engine that's based roughly on a Ferrari engine. Could I use that manifold? No, you can't, because it's a completely different Ferrari engine it is based on. It's not on this car, so it will not work. And I don't want to have a Maserati plenum on this. I want a Ferrari plenum on this. I could potentially change over to individual throttle bodies. Yes, that is possible. It is a very expensive thing to do. And that brings me back to the final main reason why I want to keep this, is because it doesn't say Ferrari on this engine anywhere else. And if I'm going to all this time and effort to put a Ferrari engine into an Alfa Romeo, I don't want to have to go every time I open the bonnet, people go, well, what engine is that? I want it to be obviously a Ferrari engine. I want it still to resemble what it is. That's the reason I did it. Otherwise, I could have put a much cheaper Maserati engine in it or anything else. So I want to keep these plenums. I want it to still say Ferrari on the engine because I'm going to all this effort to make it a Ferrari engine car. I want it to be obviously Ferrari. So that brings me back to my main issue, that I have all of this extra stuff that has to come off the front of this engine that extends it out and makes this bonnet bulge have to be enormous. If I show you here, there is no real easy way to make a smaller rubber fitting to mount this onto the front of the car. Now I could get something like this and get some sort of silicone connectors and try and sort of mount it straight up to the front of the car, but it's not very stable and secure, and I'm not very happy with that mounting method. So what I finally decided I'm going to use is I'm going to take this big aluminium donut and I'm going to cut this end off a bit and weld on this section at about a 45-degree angle or so that the throttle bodies are mounted further down and they curve away straight away so that I can lower that bulge in the bonnet and get it all back, keeping the Ferrari plenum and not having this big ugly monstrosity on the bonnet, and try and make it a little bit more subtle. That is the plan. That is my plan moving forward. So it's time now to start sort of playing around with some things and see what we can come up with as far as throttle bodies on a Ferrari engine. Okay, so I've cut out a couple of pieces of my donut and I've got a nice 45-degree angle that's going to be welded onto the end of the plenum, and then I need to weld a ring onto the end of that. This ring squares up the end of the bend, and that will then enable me to bolt on the throttle bodies onto the end of this whole unit. So it will then move the throttle bodies down and have them sitting at a 45-degree angle lower, so I can actually get my slope in my bonnet. So it's time to clean up these bits and start doing a few tack welds and see if it all goes together the way I hope it does. Alright, so a bit of time spent welding. I am getting much happier with my TIG welds. They're still not perfect, but they're definitely getting better. Practice definitely helps on these things. And I've just quickly mocked up the throttle bodies in position. And I just put the radiator back in again, and I can already see that at pretty much straight on, it's not going to work, just because at least at these angles, it's all too tight to the radiator. But that is why I only taped on these fittings for the time being. I think we can turn them so they sort of come out to the side, and I can stick the throttle body sort of out slightly wider sideways each, and I think that's going to be a better way of doing it. So let's do a bit more playing around with tape and see what we come up with as far as throttle body angles. Alright, so sitting these on slight angles actually is going to work a lot better. At least on the driver's side, we actually should have enough room here, but on the passenger side, it's a little bit tight. And that's because we have radiator outlet right here. So what I'm thinking is I might actually add I'm going to cut up another bend and make the bend a little go a little bit further around before we actually join on the throttle body, and I might even replicate it on the other side so we have it sort of relatively even though these are not perfectly evenly spaced, because the banks are not even anyway. We actually have this bank sit slightly further forward than this bank, so they're not perfectly symmetrical to start with, but I want to still make it look neat and tidy. So let's try and cut out another slightly larger bend and see if we can sort of work things into it to make it just right. So I've drawn a bit of a mark on here. I thought before we go any further, I just want to give you guys a bit of realistic expectations of where I think we're heading. I think we can move this bonnet bulge back, sort of take the heftiness off of the front of it. So it's still going to have quite a large bulge in the front. That's inevitable. We have a big V8 in front of this thing. But by taking this triangular piece here off of it, if you can sort of see that in the image, I think it's going to make a big difference to the actual size of the visual impact of the bonnet bulge. I think it'll be better and easier to live with if we do it like that. So, all right, let's keep going. All right, so I've gone through and I've done a little bit more work on getting a bit more radius on my inlet tubes because it was too tight before. I needed to bring it around so they really come out sideways to fit in. And I thought it was a good time to quickly talk about welding aluminium. I get messages from people semi-regularly asking me about welders, and I want to establish straight away that I'm a self-taught welder. Yes, I am definitely not an expert, never had any proper lessons or anything, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But I get people asking me, oh look, I'm looking for a TIG welder, what should I get? And then a little way into the conversation, I realise that they have no experience welding at all. And if that's the case, then you probably do not need a TIG welder. A TIG welder is much more difficult. What you want to start with is a MIG welder. A MIG welder is, I call it like a hot glue gun. It's the easiest welder to use. It is the simplest thing to get your head around, to start welding and to start learning how to actually stick two pieces of metal together, making the pull and all of those sort of concepts. You really need to start and walk before you run. So a lot of people, this is going to be completely obvious, but basically the three main types of home welders are MIG, stick and TIG. Now, stick welder is what I first ever used a welder with my dad years ago as a kid on the farm, and basically you've got like the electrode, like a sparkler looks like, coming out the end of your handle, and you sort of scratch it to start, and then I always found it really difficult to use. Stick welders are really good for heavy duty stuff, outside, weld anywhere. Nowadays they're a really tiny little welder, so they have their place, but not something that I ever plan on using much. MIG welders, as I said, are the go-to, easy, get stuck in, yeah, like a hot glue gun. Just press the button, the wire comes through the nozzle and straight in, so you don't have to add anything else in. It's a one-handed operation, just pull the trigger and off you go. By far the easiest way. TIG welding. TIG welder is something more complicated now. There's lots of combination machines out there now that are MIG, stick and TIG, which my MIG over here does, but it is only DC TIG. And a lot of people, I don't think, actually understand that you can't really weld aluminium with DC. The only way to properly weld aluminium is with an AC/DC welder, which are more expensive. So AC/DC TIGs generally, from what I've seen, aren't combination machines. This one from Weldforce is really, really nice. It has a lot more complicated modes and it takes a bit more to get your head around it, but the basic concept is that you can feed in a bit of power to start with, and then you can get it to ramp up to the peak, and then when you let off, it will taper down gradually, and you can have a bit of gas going afterwards so that it keeps protecting the weld as it cools down. All of these things are all adjustable and selectable. And when you select AC, the difference between AC and DC is AC, alternating current. So on aluminium, the reason why you really want AC is because DC, the way I imagine it, is the power is just going into the weld the whole time. Whereas AC, alternating current, is going into the weld and out of the weld. A bit in and a bit out. And the bit in is doing the welding, the bit out is doing the cleaning, because aluminium oxidizes almost instantly. So you have to clean it up just before you weld, and then even as you're welding and heating it up, it is oxidizing the whole time. So what the AC does is it gets a bit of heat in to sort of help melt it, but then a bit of cleaning when the power's coming back out. Heat, clean, and you can adjust the percentage of how much heating and how much cleaning it is. And I just played around with this one a little bit, and I've got it set up so it's more like it's about 60% heat and about 40% clean. You can adjust that to whatever seems to work the best. That's what I'm finding at the moment. So that's a quick rundown, very, very quick rundown on the difference between MIG, stick and TIG. As I said, TIG is invaluable if you want to do aluminium welding. My aluminium welding is definitely not amazing. You can sort of see the stuff here that I was doing, but it does the job. It's, yeah, I'm not going to win any competitions on welding, but I'm going to stick a couple of bits of aluminium together and they're nice and solid and strong, and that's what I want. So let's keep going and stop my rambling. All right, so I put the bonnet back on, and if we go in deep, you can see in here, there's a ton of room in there now that I can actually bring this whole bonnet bulge back and bring it in like I was showing you, and still have plenty of room for fitting the intake. So I think it's time to do the other side, get that ready, and then we can start looking at welding my new piece onto the plenum. All right, so the next slightly scary thing I'm doing is I'm going to cut this lip off of the end of the plenum here. It'll give me another 5 mil or so, and also sort of cut it back to sort of a similar thickness aluminium to what I'm welding to, rather than this thicker edge. It actually has this sort of groove in it where the original rubber couplings sort of clipped in. Don't need that anymore, so let's cut that back, get a little bit more space, and then we might be able to look at welding on the pieces on for good. Okay, before I weld this up completely, people might have noticed I've actually got a bit of a gap here. That's because the donut that I got, I couldn't get one in the size, exactly the same size I needed, but I think this is 76 mil instead of an 80 mil, so it's not that difficult to actually just widen it out a little bit, just stretch it out physically, and I've just made a little patch piece to go in. So now I'm just going to weld that up, and then we can weld this onto the manifold. Okay, and that was a surprising amount of work. Because of aluminium stuff, you really need to get the fit up really close compared to steel. Aluminium seems to melt away a lot, so if you've got holes, it's much easier to fill holes in mild steel than it is when you're welding with aluminium. You really want a nice tight fit up. But I'm quite happy with that. That's they're now sitting in a good spot. So let's get the bonnet out and test fit it and see how we're looking. So like I showed you before, there is a heap of room in there now. There is going to be a lot of space to be able to bring this whole lip of the bonnet back, close this window up. If I can make the window sort of start at the start of these plenums rather than all the way up here, I think we're going to have a much more subtle bonnet shape. But I think I'm going to leave that until next week. I don't want to start hacking into the bonnet. I think that is going to be a mission unto itself. So, all right, I think it must mean it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, this is the 100th episode of Mrs. Jeff and the Alfarrari. So, in 1953, a driver from Scuderia Guastalla named Giulio Musitella took delivery of one of the last Ferrari 166 MMs. This 2-litre V12 was set to head off to Vignale to receive its bodywork, but Musitella was not happy with its weight, and he commissioned Carlos Arbath to design a new body. Carlo Arbath had just formed Arbath from the now defunct Cisitalia and was best known for his unconventional approach. Arbath designed and built a unique aluminium body and frame with bolt-on panels, which allowed any damage to be removed and replaced quickly. In total, the body and frame weighed a mere 55 kilos or 121 pounds. And with its unique central headlight, it was one of the most unusual Ferraris of the day. In fact, the Ferrari Arbath ended up weighing 275 kilos or 600 pounds less than its Vignale-bodied contemporaries. Overall, it paid off, with Musitella taking out a class win at the 1953 Targa Florio. At the end of the season, probably due to lack of replacements, it was rebodied by Scaglietti. However, almost 50 years later, it was returned to its original Arbath body.
Wow, 100 episodes on the Alfarrari, which means we've been going for roughly 2 years on this build so far.
Only 2 years? It feels so much longer.
But I'm enjoying the process. I enjoy doing the fabrication and wrapping my head around things. I'm much happier with how this setup is now. I am going to be putting bigger Racework silicon joiners in there. I've just got to order them. So there will be flexibility for movement of the engine and that sort of stuff. I'm not too concerned about that. These can, once the air filters go in on the end of them, they'll have plenty of space to move around. Yes, and hopefully next week we tackle the bonnet and get it looking a lot better than what it was, because I just wasn't right. I wasn't happy. So I'm going to do it again and I'm going to make it right.
So I say, devil's in the detail.
That's right.
You know, that last 2%.
Yeah, takes 99% of the time.
That's worth it.
All right.
Wow. So,
usual, like, subscribe.
Yep. If you want to follow Jeff a day earlier and see the videos without ads, join him on Patreon.
Yep.
And yeah, he loves reading your comments, so keep on writing.
Yep, Facebook and Instagram. I do have little hints of what's coming up. So join me, Home Built by Jeff, there as well. All right, guys.
See you guys.
See you time.
Hey guys, it's the 100th episode of Mrs. Jeff. Little did I think all those years ago I'd still be doing this.
It's the 100th episode of the Alfarrari.
Little did I think I'd be doing this all these years later.
No, the Alfarrari.
Oh. Hey guys, I feel like I've got something in my eye, like I've got a hair or something, a lash.